Thomas from Meaningful Gigs, and welcome back to Heroes of the Creative Revolution. In this episode, I speak with DesignOps expert Bassel Deeb about vulnerability's importance in design work. He talks about how vulnerability can improve both the process and outcome of design work, provides some tips on embracing vulnerability in the workplace, highlights the design/DesignOps community as a resource, and much more. Let's dive in. Hi, Bassel. Thanks for coming on the show. Could you just start off pretty easy, letting us know your origins, how you got into design and design ops?
Like background where you ended up in design ops by coincidence almost. So my background is in financial sector. I worked for long years in banking before I moved to the UK, and then I wanted to shift into technology companies. Finally managed to get a job as a project manager in one of them. And then at some point, the design director came to me with this idea of setting up a design ops function for that company, which was, a new word for me. I've never heard it before, to be honest. I had to go and Google what the heck is design ops to begin with. Came across multiple, blogs, and this is back in 2017-18. It was definitely something that was very, very new in the UK and Europe. It was still kind of like brewing in the US, and I mean as a word, like it was coined, I think, by David Malouf in 2018 as sort of like a discipline, a word to be used. We know that what we do has been kind of like living for longer. But anyway, when I came across like so many ways to define design operations, I went back to the director saying to him, what is it for this company? Like I came across so many ways to define this. What do you think it is for this specific company? And he said to me, I don't know, let's go and figure it out together. And that sort of like, got me, and I wanted to go and explore, although it was slightly out of character for me, having worked in banking for 10 years and kind of like went up the ladder step by step to go suddenly and explore something with a blank canvas was exciting and new. And then from there, I worked with them, set up the design ops function in that company, moved to another company, did the same thing for them. And I'm now at Frog, which is part of Capgemini, which is a sort of like a global consultancy. And I do more of program management, and I'm part of our org design capability, which is again looking at activation for organizations, including design operations and delivery operations and so on. So that's where I am now.
So as a design leader, what are the key steps to your creative process?
I think everyone has their own sort of like creative flow and creative process. One of the ones that I kind of like try to embody myself and talk to people about is a process of, we all as designers, and although, I'm not a craft designer, but I am a designer in profession. I design processes, I design ways of working. So I call myself a designer. So I think a lot of creative people, whether that's creative in terms of like visual creativity or any type of creativity, I think I prefer to kind of like take a pause and at the beginning and try to understand what I'm actually about to go into. Another step that I've learned early on in my days in design operation, especially when I shifted between two companies of design operation, is to unlearn basically what you think or what you think is the right thing. Because I believe once you have a strong belief that the answer and that's the right thing to do, you killed any creative process that you might have. You block that creativity. And then you go and start framing what you're trying to achieve, and this is sort of like where my structural brain comes in to kind of like frame the problem, so actually you can try to measure it later and understand what you're trying to achieve, rather than just going with the blank canvas that you might have started with. And then you go and create, and final step is to kind of like validate what you've been doing. And I think creativity itself, it requires curiosity, which comes with that understanding bit. It requires boldness to be adventurous and try to find something or find a different solution or be creative, which means that you also need to be courageous in doing so. And all of that, if you peel that level, it means that I need to be able to fail, because if I am not able to feel empowered to fail in my creativity, then I can't be creative. I get boxed basically, which also requires a bit of level of vulnerability in accepting that that might happen, and how can I be able to do that, basically to embrace the failure. So I think this is at core. If you strip all of these layers around creativity, you will find vulnerability kind of like sitting at the core of it, at least from my perspective.
So how do you see vulnerability being kind of like a superpower in creative work?
Yeah, and I think I think the power of vulnerability comes from the fact that if you think about it, it's often been associated with things like weakness or shame or uncertainty or lots of negativity goes around vulnerability from the face value of it and the way that we inheritedly kind of like been talked about it, especially weakness and the shame of weakness comes a lot in play. But research have shown that it's tightly linked to joy, to belonging, to innovation, to problem solving, to ethical thinking, and that's not my research, of course. And when I talk about vulnerability, I'm not, just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert, but I am passionate about it. And I've read a lot, and I've seen a lot of Brené Brown, basically pieces of work, who, if people don't know who she is, I mean, she's been a researcher of vulnerability for about 20 years, I think now, or something. So all of that I mentioned is coming from her research into vulnerability. And I think given the fact that you have to be, like we say to people, to be creative or to be innovative, you have to step outside of the box. Stepping outside of the box is not a small task to be done, especially when you don't know what's outside of the box. It requires those elements that I mentioned earlier, like curiosity and boldness and being courageous to actually step outside of the box. And in order for you to do that, you need to be able to harness the genuine sort of like power of being vulnerable, of not knowing what's going to happen when you step outside of the box, basically.
So I guess, sticking with vulnerability, saying you want to be vulnerable and then actually putting it into practice are two very different things. Do you have any guidance or tips for someone to kind of reach that point where they can actually use vulnerability as a tool to help them do better work and communicate better?
Yes and no. So I can talk from my experience again. I can talk from what I found work or not. And as I said, it's an individual journey for people. So one thing which I mentioned earlier, sort of like weakness, when it's linked to shame, it kind of like block you from being vulnerable. So like understanding that being vulnerable doesn't equal being weak and doesn't equal being ashamed or that sort of thing. And it takes time for someone to to feel that. Another thing that I want to kind of like put out there before I talk about how I got to a point where I feel like I can embrace it is the difference between vulnerability, and I think like this is not my words, it's Brené Brown's words. I'm not the brain behind this, but what she said is vulnerability minus boundaries is not vulnerability. So basically what she was trying to say is, me being at work and being open and vulnerable at work doesn't mean that I have to overshare or share something that I'm not comfortable sharing just because I wanted to be vulnerable in front of others. That doesn't mean vulnerability. So boundaries is, boundaries are healthy, and especially in workplaces. And I know lots of people would have concerns about being vulnerable at workplace, and what if I be, and then that be taken against me. So that's why I think one of the things the way that I would recommend doing it, and again, it works for me, it might not work for other people, but I think it's worth kind of like considering is, first of all, to kind of like sit down and recognize what the task at hand, and if you want to approach that openness and vulnerability, and try to recognize how you feel about it, and once you recognize that feeling, name it, and once you name it, you can control it, tame it, digest it. So if I am about to do this act of vulnerability, let's say, and I reflect on it and I still feel, I feel ashamed of that, then maybe I need to kind of like take a pause and think about that before actually doing it, and try to disassociate these two. If I am doing it just because I want to offload, maybe that's not the right time and not the right person. If I am doing it because it progresses the work and it progresses others and it makes me feel more liberated what I'm doing, then maybe it's something to consider. Second thing is baby steps. Like you need to test with people that you trust to begin with, and sort of like start with small things like, when you have a coffee catch up with someone, to be more vulnerable with them, or open, or discuss how you feel about certain tasks, or and again, it's not about offloading it to others. It's more about, I'm going through a tough day. I don't need to tell you what the details are, but also it's not enough just to tell you I'm going through a tough day. And the valuable piece of information here is, if you're going through a tough day, to tell someone how they can support you and how they can approach you to do that or not approach you to that. So like that sort of like understanding from transactional analysis point of view is where it kind of like empower you to be not very good that day, but also empower them to know how to behave and to react to what you're doing. Once you've done that, I think it's good to take a step and breathe and celebrate that you've achieved something and you've done this, and again, reflect on how you feel about it. The one thing that I found very empowering, especially when it comes from the DesignOps community, which kind of like plays a big role in the culture and the connectivity of the designers, is to actually share how you felt, or why it was important, or how it enabled you to kind of like move forward, or unblocked your creative thinking by doing certain things. I think also talking about it out loud to other people, it helped, or at least it helped me kind of like embrace it even more, because I feel like, when you talk your thoughts out loud and kind of like you listen to yourself, and then you can move on to another step, which is sort of like identifying spaces and opportunities to allow others to feel the same. And that's why I kind of like talk about it, and I've written about it, because I feel like it helps the community and not just myself when we talk about this.
So is there a particular challenge that you've experienced in your roles in design ops that you've been able to overcome that you're particularly proud of you could tell us about?
In design ops, I think one of the biggest challenges that I face, and I still face until this day when it comes to design operations, is it's not a tough one necessarily, but it's a long-lasting one, which is around education. And I always sort of like refer to people to Friends episode where they would do the game, the quick answers game, and process ask them what's Chandler's job, and no one knows the answer. This is how I used to feel about design operations for years, because like none of my friends understand what design operation is, none of my coworkers understand what design operation is. So education was a long ongoing game, and it's tough because it's a changing dynamic, it's a changing scenery of what design can do. It's a long list of menu that design ops can offer to organizations. So it's still probably the long lasted challenge for me. And now moving to kind of like consultancy, doing that as well within the consultancy realm and sort of like with clients, it's still an ongoing game of like educating people where and when design ops is impactful and what is design ops to begin with.
So looking back on your career within design ops, what kind of advice would you give to your younger self, or perhaps someone else just starting off along a similar path?
Disclaimer, I was not so young when I started on this path, right? So younger in terms of design operation journey, yes. I think someone recently was saying, oh, I'm trying to get the soft landing into design operations. Like, there is no such a thing as soft landing in design operations, right? Like, you always get a lot thrown at you because there's often a lot that you can do and help with. So my advice to anyone who's starting their career in design operation is take it easy. There's a long list of stuff that needs to be done. And it's consuming to try to fix everything. So take it easy and stay focused. And that stay focused could be from either what matters to you and to the business at the time, or what's on high priority for the business. So like you get a long list of stuff that needs to be done, trying to prioritize that and focusing on certain part of it rather than trying to fix everything. Probably would be my advice when I started this career, because you get excited and you want to help people. Like the most exciting part of design operations is helping people. Until this day, the best rewarding thing that you get when you're design ops is when someone comes to you and say, you've made my day.
So let's talk fun for a moment. What's the most fun you've had within design operations?
Again, like going back to people, I think working with people is very joyful when you're a design ops person. Creating spaces for those people is fun. So like, for instance, we did, in one of the previous companies, I used to do a survey asking people when they join to the design team as part of onboarding to kind of like rate their confidence in certain tools. And then I use that to, first of all, for me to know where we need to kind of like upskill people and in certain tools. And I wanted to break the stigma around certain tools, like especially when I moved to that company, for instance, it was the first time that we used Google Suite at work, right? I've never used Google Suite at work before. And I it was like suddenly you shifting your mindset from using Outlook at work to suddenly using Google Gmail. And Gmail for me is my personal email that I barely look at because it's full of spam often, to suddenly I need to take it seriously. So I wanted people to feel fine to say, I never used Zooms before, right? I used to work at a company that used to use Team. So it's fine to kind of like say that. But what also was very fun coming out of that thing is I ended up highlighting a couple of people who were expert in Figma, a couple of people who were not necessarily very comfortable with Figma. And we did a series of Figma for Fun sessions, which was sort of like learning tool, but kind of like getting people together from different disciplines. We've had the design disciplines. We've had content designers and researchers who are interested in upskilling or learning Figma, but we had analysts, we had dev people coming to those sessions. And we used to do small tasks, but they're kind of like fun tasks. And I think that was an example where you give people a space to shine. I did nothing. I'm not a Figma expert. I just connected those people, helped them by creating the space and sort of like forming a program and whatever. But at the end of the day, they led those sessions, and it was beautiful to see kind of like that machine working with sort of like a little gentle touch from you, basically.
Great. So that was the last question I had. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or wanted to plug on your end?
No, it's been great. I think one plug I would give is the DesignOps community is great. It helped me a lot throughout my time, and still helping me a lot. So lean on it. There is a lot of forums out there for design operations. I'm not gonna. Well, I might do one shout out. So I think like a big shout out for me for someone like Meredith Black, who created the DesignOps assembly, and I've learned a lot from that space and I've contributed to it. I had the pleasure when I started, and one thing actually is when you start and you feel empowered to say I don't know, it's important, because that's what I did when I started design operations, and I was like, I don't know how to do it. I was empowered to go and say I need help, and that's when I had the privilege. At the time, Dave Malouf was available, so I had a couple of sessions with him on a kind of like coaching session. So he takes a bit of a lot of credit for my career, basically. I think he put me on the right path. But yeah, just capitalize on the community that's out there for design operations.